from the Dream Hotel in Hollywood, California, this is Lips LA on Dash Radio.
Hey guys, welcome to the show today. It's Scott Lips, and you are listening to Lip Service. Today on the show, Mr. Shepard Fairey. He is most notably an artist and activist. Shepard Fairey is actually one of the most important contemporary street artists. He also happens to be a graphic designer, an activist, an illustrator, and co-founder of the brand, or actually founder of the brand Obey Clothing, amongst many, many other things. I think you guys would know Shepard. He first came to fame for the Andre the Giant sticker and has obviously gone on to do the 2008 Obama Hope poster, which was everywhere. Super excited to have him on the show today. I'm a big fan of Shepard Fairey, and as you guys know, a big fan of street artists and culture, which is great. So just coming up in just a moment, Mr. Shepard Fairey on Lip Service. So welcome to the show, Shepard Fairey. How are you, my man?
I'm good.
You good?
Staying busy, the usual stuff.
Summer days. Thanks for coming out on this beautiful summer day here.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I wore this shirt as sort of an homage to you because I know you started in sort of the punk rock skateboard movement. So I don't know if this shirt, I'm wearing a Sonic Youth shirt for those of you who can't see, but I don't know if this shirt rings true to you at all.
Of course it does, because it's a Raymond Pettibone illustration. Pettibone did all the art for Black Flag. He did the Black Flag logo, almost all their album covers and flyers, and he's one of my favorite artists.
Awesome. Is it safe to say that your beginnings in sort of, the skateboard community and punk rock and whatnot kind of led you to where you are today? Was that your biggest inspiration? Was there film involved? Was it music? I know it was sort of a combination of everything, I believe, but just talk about, because I kind of like to take it back to the beginning. So we're going to start kind of you in Rhode Island and South Carolina and your upbringing and whatnot, but I actually like to talk about sort of the beginnings of where your art came from. And I know music and skateboarding had a lot to do with it. And I don't know if you know my background, but I'm Courtney Love's drummer on top of a million other things. So my background is also a little bit in punk rock and obviously rock and roll. So
Yeah, well, I love to draw from the time I was a little kid, but I grew up in South Carolina where it's very traditional. There's not a lot of avant-garde art. So discovering skateboarding and punk rock was extremely important for me, because that was rebellious progressive culture where art was used in a way that wasn't just decorative. It was really used as like
provocative too, right?
A tool of the revolution in a way.
Yeah.
And I needed that outlet because my framework was very preppy country club.
South Carolina,
centric.
right?
Yeah. And I was sort of a restless kid, but I didn't know why. And then I discovered an alternative to that preppy mentality and just the Southern way of life, and it was a bridge to the broader world that was really important for me and exhilarating. Making the connection between what Winston Smith did for the Dead Kennedys as art and what Jello was saying in the lyrics, and then of course the visceral side of the music itself. It was like a whole ecosystem to get to be part of. And the Clash were huge for me. Bad Brains, Black Flag, the Misfits. And almost all these groups had really awesome, provocative visuals, and all the stuff was cool, but it wasn't intimidating. It didn't feel like you had to be some sort of virtuoso painter or something to execute that kind of work. So it also made me a little less fearful of jumping in the mix, like making stencils, making homemade T-shirts. And skateboarding culture was the same way. It was punk rock and skateboarding were hand in hand in the 80s.
Yeah, did you see a lot of the punk rock flyers growing up, or were they more references in books? Because I grew up in the late 80s here. We used to flyer the city. Bands used to come here, Jane's Addiction, whoever, and we would put our flyers on telephone poles, and a band would come and put their flyer on top of that, and you would basically plaster the town with your flyers until someone took them down or you got in trouble or whatever it may be. And that was the way pre-internet that bands used to promote themselves. So were these punk rock flyers sort of like hanging around, or were they more like book references that you'd seen?
Well, I wish there were books. I did manage to get a hold of a couple of Sex Pistols books. They were sort of like the punk rock band that actually cracked the mainstream in a way. But I did a year of art boarding school out here in Idlewild, and we'd come into LA and we took a trip to San Francisco, and I was grabbing flyers. I saw the Circle Jerks in South Carolina. They're the only punk band that came through.
I was going to say there wasn't a lot of punk rock bands playing in South Carolina at that time.
In 1986. I also, with a friend, took a trip from Charleston to New York. Somehow before the internet, we found out that one end of the week, the Smiths were playing on the Queen is Dead tour. The other end of the week, it was GBH, 7 Seconds, the Cro-Mags, Toxic Reasons, and the Effigies at the Ritz.
Amazing.
And I went all around the city because those flyers were posted up everywhere, and waited till a night when it rained and it was the wheat paste was soggy enough to carefully peel it off the wall.
You took them home.
I still have that
amazing,
flyer.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So it's funny. So your references were heavy punk rock and skateboarding, and you went to school in Rhode Island, art school. I feel like a lot of great musicians also go to art school too. And you sort of got into early on, for people that don't know, but I think most people know, they're listening to the show, Andre the Giant was your huge breakthrough, and you started stickering the whole city with these Andre the Giant has a posse stickers. And was that sort of the early beginnings? Because you had made T-shirts before, right? Like rock and roll T-shirts that you were that was sort of your inception into this art world, would you say?
Yeah, it was. I mean, the funny thing, I had made homemade Sex Pistols and Husker Du and Misfits and Independent Trucks, the skateboard truck company. I just made my own versions of shirts I either couldn't afford or couldn't find, and I liked the idea of it being kind of my idiosyncratic take on something that was a signifier for all my cultural peers. But then when I got to Rhode Island School of Design, that's when I really started to discover graffiti as a subculture, and then also hip hop culture, because I think by the late 80s, most punk rock and hardcore had sort of painted themselves into a corner of a bunch of angry guys, and I was looking to broaden my horizons. Funny you brought up Jane's Addiction, because I went to go see the Ramones with Jane's Addiction opening, and that was sort of the first time I thought about, okay, there's this new zone that's not classic rock and it's not punk rock, but it's
a combination.
Yeah, it's like it's alternative, and but anyway, I decided that groups like Public Enemy and NWA were sort of the new punk rock, in a sense that people who were angry and
it was a new punk rock.
Yeah, not virtuoso musicians, but like making records by these other methods that were very DIY creative, and so I was sort of just into all of the stuff that had that spirit. And my crew of skateboarders, sometimes we called ourselves it was the Watershed, Team Shed, and the Team Shed, or the Shed Crew, or sometimes the Posse. So when I made this homemade stencil, trying to teach another friend how to make a stencil of Andre the Giant, which was just sort of a random thing that I found in the newspaper. I had liked wrestling as a young kid, but when I found out that it was all staged, it was like, oh man, what? And the Easter Bunny's not real, and there's no Santa Claus.
And didn't your friend say to you, that's a bad idea?
Yeah, he thought it was stupid, and then I said, well, yeah, what are you talking about, man? Andre's Posse's taken over. Team Shed has played. And because, 10 people know about that. We got to narrow the circle, man. That's a sellout territory. 10 plus.
Definitely. In all fairness, wrestlers back then, look, you had like Mil Mascaras and Roddy Piper, I believe. Maybe that was a little bit later. But I remember Mil Mascaras and Andre the Giant. So I guess wrestlers also looked kind of cooler back then.
Oh, yeah.
Right? You could basically, your whole visual of what wrestling was probably a lot easier to pinpoint because the identity was so strong back then. Were you a wrestling fan, or were you like a passive fan like me?
I've been sort of a passing fan. I mean, I like to watch it on Sunday on cable when I was like 11 years old. But it was something that I thought was kind of cool in a kitsch way, the way that I liked Kiss, the band.
Right. I still like Kiss.
Yeah, I still do too. And the Melvins being such Kiss fans really made me have a deeper appreciation for Kiss, because I think the Melvins are one of the best bands ever.
Definitely, and the Nirvana connection.
Yeah,
sure.
Totally.
So it's funny because you start this campaign, and actually this place called The Living Room had actually there was sort of an article in the paper from what I read that they were like, if you can figure out what this Andre the Giant campaign is all about, you're going to get free tickets to one of the punk rock shows coming up, right?
Yeah, and the Nice paper had a circulation of 15,000. They run this contest, and I wanted those tickets, but I didn't want to, part of what I thought appealed about the campaign was the mystery. So I didn't want to say, hey, yeah, I'm Shepard Fairey, I make those, can I please have my tickets? So I just dropped some stickers off in an envelope that said, I can't tell you what it is because that would spoil it, but here's some stickers if it's any consolation. And then the following week, the nice paper ran the image of the Andre sticker again, and it said no definitive answers, but at least now we have a handwriting sample. Right. But I was doing.
It was like CSI or something.
Yeah.
Andre the Giant CSI.
It was amazing. But I was working a $4.25 an hour skate shop job. I'd made maybe 1,500 stickers total, and within 2 weeks, the nice paper had reproduced 30,000 images of that, and I realized, oh, you know what? Part of this game is just manipulating the media.
Yeah. I think it still is, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
of course.
Still,
I mean, there would be no President Trump if that weren't the case.
No question.
That's a good and a bad thing. But
was graffiti sort of part the same way the graffiti, and graffiti artists would sort of tag their work, and you had to go around the city to kind of find where the tags would appear. It was almost like a treasure hunt. Was that sort of the inspiration behind the stickering and how that all started for you?
Well, I loved, first few times I went to New York, I was fascinated by just the volume of graffiti and the risk that people would go through to climb crazy places. And I love the spirit of that, but I wanted to do it with stuff that was a little bit less cryptic. So the Andre thing, still cryptic, but it was, at least it wasn't like, that comes from a subculture that I'll never understand, so I'm just gonna ignore it as like it's another piece of ivy growing up somewhere that I don't like, but it's not really my thing. The Andre thing, I think almost everyone treated it like a Rorschach test. Like this thing is a cult. It's a skateboard company. Right. It's a band. It's that people were very comfortable giving an interpretation, and I loved that side of it, that there was it would create conversations, and it would also create conversations about what's valid in public space, which became the most interesting thing to me, because what it made me realize was my little bit of mischief was disrupting the normal control, the normal flow. The normal flow is you're a consumer, you passively get to receive this advertising information or this government signage information, and you don't participate in this conversation. Then, when you put stuff up, it's like, wait a second, this isn't supposed to be a two-way conversation.
Right.
And I like that, because I've always had a mischievous side.
No question. And at some point, you did a billboard, right, of the Andre the Giant. Was that sort of your first, when things started clicking for you? You were like, I think people are really taking to the sneaker campaign, the sticker campaign, not sneaker, the sticker campaign that I'm doing. So I think at this point we should sort of take it up a notch and do a billboard, right? And that was sort of your first bit of a legal activity, more or less, would you say, in terms of like a bigger project and sort of taking it to the next step? Yeah,
I had been putting up a lot of stickers and even some small stencils, but I had an assignment at the Rhode Island School of Design, which I'll call RISD for short from now on, which was an illustration class, and the teacher passed around a hat with fortune cookies in it, and the assignment was illustrate your fortune cookie insert. I'd seen this billboard of Buddy Cianci running for mayor, which just had him holding his hand up, waving, and said, Cianci, he never stopped caring about Providence. I was like, what the hell?
He was a bit of a dubious character,
yeah,
too,
what
right?
is that supposed to mean? I knew that he had a sordid past, but I didn't really know much detail about it, but I just thought, that's meaningless. I want to do something to that billboard. And so my fortune cookie said, to affect the quality of the day is no small achievement. And I thought that's open-ended enough.
Right. Let me take on this billboard.
Yeah, so I made 64 11 by 17 copies taped together to make an 8.5-foot Andre head, and put a sign in his hand that said join the posse, and got up there with a couple lookouts staged on the corner with glue and a roller, and just did it. It was my very first time doing something, and I was totally winging it, and luckily it wasn't a windy night and I was able to do it.
Yeah, how did you sort of know how to do that? I mean, was it just sort of trial and error? You just like, did someone show you how to paste things and wheat paste?
No one showed me. I just thought, well, Elmer's glue works with stuff and it's not very expensive. I'll mix that up, I'll put it in a rolling pan, and then later on I found out that like that's one of the least effective ways to do it. But
falls down like 10 minutes later.
Yeah, but it worked for what I was doing. But
and it was actually, in fact, the biggest PR sort of thing that could happen for you, right? Because he ended up writing a letter to you and whatnot. And So talk about how that whole thing transpired, because I think it's super interesting.
Well, Providence being not that big, a friend that I skated with went to school with Cianci's daughter, and she was like, oh, I think that guy goes to RISD. I think his name is Shepard or something. So then RISD security started sniffing around. They picked up my portfolio that had some uncut Andre sticker sheets in it, and then they brought me in, and they were ready to put out cigarettes on my face and put the hot light on me, and they were like, do you know why you're here? I said, because that billboard I did, and it just, they deflated. Like, they didn't get to do any torture at all. Right. And but then I had to go apologize to Cianci and talk about how I was going to make restitution, and I had to turn myself into the police also. Wow. But Cianci, because then I soon found out that he had a history for having a temper and being a brute, and literally putting out cigars on a guy and beating him with a fireplace log and a poker, for sleeping with his ex-wife, a guy who was a city contractor. God. This is like
you can't make this shit up.
No, it's like
I was going to say, wasn't there a mob mentality to this?
Yes,
and clearly there was.
So Cianci needed to rehabilitate his image as a brute, as well as me needing to do some sort of restitution. So he had me into his house. I just skateboarded. It was close to RISD, literally like 3 blocks from RISD. So I skate over there. He's got his henchmen, and I come in, and I go into this, oak paneled library with a fireplace, and I just, first thing I did was look at the fireplace, and the 2 henchmen look at Cianci and be like, it's okay, you can stand over there, it'll be all right, you're good, and then they said, Cianci said, so this billboard cost us a lot of money. But
you do a great accent, by the way.
I don't want to take you out of school. Have you ever worked with inner city kids or something like that? And I was like, I'm the teacher's assistant in the screen printing class. And he said, yeah, think about a good project to do with the kids, and then we'll work it out. And here's my number. And he gave me his monogrammed, foil stamped letterhead and his number. It just said buddy. And then. About 5 days later, there's an article in the newspaper that says Cianci resolves billboard prank, and it said that he's going to get me to do this art workshop with at-risk inner city youth, and he doesn't want to interrupt my education because he just wants me to put my art to more constructive use. And I realized this guy saw an amazing PR opportunity here. Definitely. And he took it. He doesn't really care whether I ever actually do the project. I'm not even going to bother calling him. I never called him, never heard from him, never heard from the cops, and that was that. Other than that, I was on disciplinary probation at the school, and the school was the school security were more mad at me than the RISD cop. I mean, than the Providence cops.
Meanwhile, the security that he had was like, "You better watch it, kid, or you're gonna end up in the river or something."
Right.
I heard, right?
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, that's what everyone said. They're like. They're like, dude, you're dead. You know this guy? You're dead.
This is Rhode Island.
Yeah,
you know what's going on here?
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's funny.
But,
and were there a lot of film references that you were sort of taking in at that point too? I mean, because obviously you had the skateboard references and the punk rock references, but what were the sort of the directors? Were you watching like Blade Runner, or was it, what kind of films were you watching at that point because a lot of your work has a heavy graphical sort of take on things.
I mean, I love movies, but really, at that point, I would say it was more things like dystopian literature, like Orwell, 1984,
okay.
Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, and then the lyrics of people like The Clash and the Dead Kennedys, and Black Flag with a song like Police Story, which is super hardcore about fighting with the police. But then I saw a movie in the early 90s called They Live.
Oh, right, sure. And that's where the Obey came from, right?
Exactly. John Carpenter's movie, and with starring, coincidentally, Roddy Piper.
Right.
So immediately...
A wrestler, for those of you who don't know.
Yeah, I was intrigued by this movie. It was in the dollar bin at the grocery store. I was really broke, so at night I would rent from the dollar bin at the grocery store, and because, Blockbuster, that was like, too luxurious for me at the time. And
you mean in the supermarket they had the dollar bin?
They did. It's Providence. You could get like your car smog tested and rent videos and
at Ralph's.
But anyway, I would print my stickers and then cut them while I was watching movies, and I watched They Live, not expecting much, and it turned out to be a really profound concept in the film. I mean, everyone should see it, but it's basically about using aliens controlling humans as a metaphor for the average person being too caught up in the rat race, keeping up with the Joneses to understand the the insidious forces of manipulation that that they're subjected to, and I liked that a lot. And
that's where the obey
the
reference
word
came
the word
from,
obey was used in that film, as well as a lot of other great slogans like consume, marry and reproduce, sleep, question nothing.
So that was a big inspiration for you, definitely,
Yeah,
and especially on the obey campaign that you did after that.
Of course. From then, I had been using the word giant because of Andre the Giant with most of my work, but I quickly started to replace that with mostly obey. And the reason was that obey is something that I think we all sometimes do subconsciously, follow the path of least resistance, try not to rock the boat, fit in. But then when someone tells you obey and they make it something you're conscious of, you're forced to say, is this something I agree with? Is this something I want to submit to? And so that idea of consciously choosing and analyzing what the variables are that go into the choice, that was something that I thought was important. And
so at that point, you took Andre the Giant's image, you sort of fine-tuned it a little bit, and you put the word obey on your next sort of work, right?
I wanted to move away from the wrestling reference, so I did an abstraction that I call the icon face. That is, it's based on the characteristics of the Andre face, but it's really abstracted and transformed into something that's almost feels like a corporate logo from a very ominous, malevolent corporation.
Definitely. Yeah, so it's funny. So you have all these references. You have Warhol, Lichtenstein, the Dead Kennedys. You have the Clash. You have They Live and whatnot. And if you put all those into a blender, that's sort of how the beginnings of your art career kind of started, right? Yeah. And so it's interesting because you're not only just an artist. I mean, you do so much more than that at this point. You have an ad agency. You have Obey the clothing line. You're also a graphic illustrator, and an activist, obviously. So there's almost like nothing that you don't do at this point. So I kind of want to jump into all that. But after that, how did you? At what point did you start thinking, you know what, this is really clicking with culture? I did the sticker thing, I did Obey, and people are really starting to take to what I'm doing. Was that sort of the point with the Obey sort of campaign that you did, that you started realizing this could be sort of a commerce route for me, or were not even thinking I'll just stick to my T-shirts and maybe I'll do the Obey campaign and maybe I'll make some extra money in between printing the T-shirts and whatnot?
Well, I had made homemade T-shirts, and then as I got good at screen printing while I was in college, I decided that I wanted to screen print for a living because it was a way to do contract work for people to just earn money, but also have that equipment at my disposal to make my own work. And I thought I was going to end up having my version of Warhol's factory in a Providence warehouse with a skateboard ramp in it, and it didn't turn out that glamorous. I didn't have the my era's version of the Velvet Underground and,
right.
and Mick Jagger and Iggy
The
Pop
factory
stopping by.
Right. We could still do that, by the way.
It was a very, very desperate time of struggle for me because I was making so little money, but I was out there putting my work up, and slowly but surely I started to get opportunities in places like Boston and New York where I would get invited to be part of art shows or museum shows and do little pop-up skateboard things, but it was all cool for a scene, but not generating any revenue. And so
you had graduated college at that point.
Yeah, I graduated college.
And so what year is this around?
Well, I graduated college in '92, but I started my screen printing business in '91.
Okay.
I was, but by '96, I was really far in debt, and so I decided that I would move to California and work with a friend of mine who offered me a job in the skateboard industry, helping him, but he also said, I'll allow you to keep making your stuff under the roof of my business so I could keep my, my T-shirts and stuff and my posters and my stickers and everything going. I'd have that latitude. He appreciated what I was doing. So
what was the name of his business?
It was called Sophisto Clothing, and he was the guy who co-founded New Deal Skateboards and Element Skateboards, which
cool.
he called at that time Underworld Element.
Okay.
And
so you take the job there. You're still doing your art on the side.
Yeah, and the clothing thing really did not work out for either of us because it's such a tough business. So I more or less shelved that, but luckily some guys from San Francisco were like, well, we want to keep making some shirts for you, and we'll we'll see if we can sell them to some record stores and maybe Urban Outfitters, boutiques, and
was it called Obey the Clothing at that point, or was it another name?
It was called Giant. Then.
Giant, okay.
Yeah, and then I became a graphic designer. I learned how to use the computer, and a lot of the screen printing I was doing was very design heavy. But I went to art school when the computer wasn't a tool for design yet, so I was just doing everything cut and paste and by hand, using a stat camera and all the traditional stuff. And then I learned how to use the computer, and the good thing was I was a solid illustrator, so I could offer graphic design plus
illustration,
and so that that gave me a little bit more appeal, I think, for record labels and some movie companies and I mean other clothing companies, all sorts of people were starting to hire me and and Andy, the guy that brought me in, and our other friend Dave, who did the DC Shoes logo, who was part of our little collective. But I worked a 2-shift day. I worked on graphic design for clients during the day, and some of the clients were cool, some were not that cool. It was just what I needed to do to survive. And then at night, I went and I printed my own art, and then I put it up on the streets.
And it's funny, you're still doing a lot of that stuff. You have a whole team of people. You have an ad agency, 20 people working for you, whatnot. But I actually saw you, I'm pretty sure this was you, at Basel in Wynwood, like painting a mural a few years back on like a side street. And I was like, oh, there's Shepard Fairey. Like, where's his team? And I was like, he does this all by himself, which is pretty amazing.
I have a couple of assistants, but I'm involved in painting every mural.
It's amazing.
I love it. It's to me, doing the big stuff outdoors is it's hard work. It's like pretty grueling blue collar work, but seeing something unfold on a large scale, if you've ever felt powerless, which I think most of us have, transforming the landscape in front of your eyes is pretty empowering.
So what was the first mural you actually did?
Well, I used to do a lot of smaller murals, wheat pasting things in a modular way, tiling up and going. I did some stuff that was pretty big that way, but it's not permanent. So around 2009, 2010 was when I started to switch over to painting the murals. And we skipped over 2008, which we have to talk about, your iconic Obama poster, right? We sort of that was such a pivotal moment in your life. So up until that point, you're at your friend's company and you're starting to do those stuff, and then companies are starting to hire you. And at that point, you started doing a few murals in between there and then that you kind of started to take shape of what you were doing? It was mostly illegal stuff.
Right.
Yeah, I was doing some murals. They just weren't with permission.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, most of the stuff was either the smaller posters that I could put on the electrical boxes in a place like LA where everybody stops at the corner at the stoplight and bam, they're right there. Or I would do the 8-foot ones that were a couple of strips of paper put together that I could, some of the images were painted so that it was red and black and white, and some of them were just black and white. But I could do those. But then I was also printing things like wallpapers so that I could tile up and repeat, and then the normal 18 by 24 prints that I would make so that I could do grids like a Warhol style, just repeat, and then the wallpaper, and then something figurative that was larger. So it started to evolve where all these little elements I could have in a messenger bag show up to almost any size wall and figure out how to do what looked like a fairly resolved mural there.
Amazing. And you had your signatures, so you had the star and different things that would make it very Shepard Fairey.
Exactly.
It's funny because we also just saw someone at the coffee shop, which I think had possibly your star on his leg, and we were like, that looks exactly like Jen and I saw this guy that looked like Shepard Fairey's star on his leg. We were like, is that Shepard Fairey's star? And you're like, so yeah, it's even to this day resonating probably in tattoos and whatnot in your design that you started back then. It was the star, and what else was sort of your signature in your beginning early work?
So the star, and then the star that's sort of inside the like the mechanical gear device, which was my love of Russian constructivists, the celebration of the worker and the means of production, and then so the star and the gear, and then just the icon face, which kind of looks like my version of Big Brother cropped into a rectangle. So those are the main things. And then I have several different Obey word marks. And one of the word marks people know me for is the red box with a white type that everyone thinks Supreme invented, but actually it was the artist Barbara Kruger who invented it. 20 years before there was a Supreme or an Obey.
Definitely. And with the idea of sort of provoking with your art, right? Looking at early punk rock as sort of that template, right? You wanted to provoke and have a conversation with your art and sort of, and eventually use it, in the activism space to do a lot of good too. But I think initially, right, it was sort of based on that punk rock ideology of provoking and starting a conversation.
Snapping people out of this sort of waking trance of the status quo initially, and just being a provocateur. I loved the idea of being disruptive, but then I did early on start to make some pieces about police brutality, surveillance, racism, but then it really didn't get topical on a regular basis until Bush was elected, and then I thought, okay,
I finally got to get involved in this.
all right, I can't just deal with platitudes. I got to be a little more specific.
Definitely, and before that, because I'm going to talk about the Obama Hope poster in a minute, you did have your design studio from like '97 to 2003, and you did a lot of work for clients like Pepsi and Hasbro and Netscape, and at that point it was like, again, kind of using art in the way of commerce, and that was your first real big, I guess, sort of collaboration with brands at that point, was it not? Sort of. Yeah,
it was, and I enjoyed doing that stuff because it was a good exercise creatively, and figuring out how to hear a creative brief from someone and solve the problem in a way that I would be proud of the result. Aesthetically was cool. Sometimes I didn't have any emotional connection to what Pepsi was doing. I was sort of take it or leave it, but I did like that they were helping me stay alive as a creative person. And
were there any brands that came to you that you just were like, I won't work for this brand? It's just
that happened all the time.
We can talk about the ones that aren't around anymore.
I mean, we can talk about the ones that are. Camel Cigarettes is still around.
Right.
I said no to them. I said no to Hummer. Isn't around anymore, which is great. But I did work for the Sierra Club in the '90s, and the idea of doing something for Hummer, which is as gas guzzling car as you can find, I just wasn't going to do it. It was there were other things too, like skateboard companies that I didn't think make good products that would offer me a decent amount of money, but I just needed to maintain my dignity and my credibility in the world that helped to make me who I am. And so there's just certain principles I'm got to be true to.
So it's interesting, even as a starving artist initially, right? If a brand came to you and said, "Hey, here's $500,000, Shepard," but we don't like the product, you still turned it down, or because of that?
And I mean, luckily, I didn't have to make choices on that scale. Nobody was offering me $500,000.
Whatever it was, even $50,000 was probably quite a lot of money back then, right?
There were some difficult choices to
make. It's hard.
But
it's a hard decision.
Once you once your credibility is in question, it's really hard to restore it.
Definitely, especially as an artist. And at that point, before you did the Obama poster, were you starting to do some of the album covers that you eventually started? Because I know you worked for Zeppelin, which is probably the holy grail of any artist to do something for Zeppelin. Is probably the coolest thing you could probably ever do. And for me, as a drummer too, I mean, Bonham and whatnot, it's the coolest reference. I mean, congrats, because that's a pretty incredible accomplishment. And the Pumpkins and Anthrax and a bunch of other bands. And some of your art also, I think a lot of it even references those old concert posters. So
I think huge inspiration for me.
Yeah.
I started off doing a lot of stuff for smaller bands, and then somehow, as my work got out there more, some bigger bands started coming to me, and I've done things for the Rolling Stones, the Doors,
a couple of small bands, and Zeppelin.
Zeppelin, of course. I've done two album covers for Zeppelin. Tom Petty's live anthology and his American Treasure that came out shortly after he died. But
what years were the biggest one? Was it sort of in 2005 when you started to get those calls?
Well, 2005 was when I did the Walk the Line movie poster, and looking at how I could make sure that the image, even though it was of Joaquin Phoenix's silhouette, that it felt just essentially Johnny Cash.
Definitely.
And looking at back at old Hat Show posters for Elvis and Johnny Cash, and where that overlapped with my aesthetic sensibility, and then merging all that together, I just thought, well, this is a poster I would like if I saw it. And it did really well, and a lot of music people saw that because it was a pretty successful movie.
Definitely.
But even prior to that, I had done my old partner and I had done Black Eyed Peas, Ella Funk cover, and then we also did the Monkey Business cover. And will.i.am was an acquaintance. I'm not a huge fan of the Black Eyed Peas, but it was a good job to get.
Definitely, and they were a massive band.
Yeah, they sold like 10 million records.
No
so
question.
all of a sudden, that's putting my work in front of a lot of people. And it wasn't that I then wanted to do more kind of pop stuff like that, but what it did when you deal with people who are operating at a higher level commercially, they frequently are looking for both what they think is cool and what they think is gonna be successful commercially. And somehow I had managed to crack that code.
That's awesome. Well, I actually want to come back in a moment and talk about the Obama poster, but I want to jump to great track, Nirvana, Drain You. And we'll be back in just a few moments with the one and only Shepard Fairey. You're listening to Lip Service on Dash Radio. We're back. We're with Shepard Fairey. We were just checking out Nirvana, Drain You, and we were just talking about Interpol. We're kind of jumping all around. But Shepard, we were just talking how you know Paul and Daniel and those guys. Good guys, right?
Yeah, they're great. When I discovered their first record in 2002, I fell in love with it immediately, and happened to meet them at Coachella, and so we ended up working on some stuff for their second album, Antics, and I did portraits of them and prints, and we did a launch party at our space in the Wiltern Theater. So, I'd gotten to work with a lot of older bands that were not, maybe they were more in the waning years of their careers, and it was very exciting for me.
At least it wasn't REO Speedwagon or something. It was,
Yeah. I do have limits.
Yeah.
But the opportunity to work with Interpol guys who I think were making really great music, had a very, very sophisticated aesthetic sensibility, that they liked what I was doing. It was sort of a dream project for me. So did that in 2004, and I think that that put my work in front of some other people. I got to then work with people like Mission of Burma after that. I've worked with so many musicians. I've done a bunch of stuff with Henry Rollins.
Definitely, and it's actually, I was going to say, it was one of the interviews I was watching. It was a great interview you guys did together, and that was actually one of the connections I knew, because musically I know that we're into a lot of the same bands and whatnot. Yeah. But I do want to, at 2008, so all this presidential stuff, the race is starting around you, and you're like, I got to jump into this, because at the end of the day, you don't want to stay silent, and you had something to say, right? So how did the Obama poster come about? What sort of led to it? Because it is arguably maybe your most famous piece of work that people know you from, right?
Yeah, it is. It is unexpectedly. I had been doing a lot of work protesting Bush and the Iraq War, and when I saw Obama's speech at the 2004 DNC, I was impressed with that, and then I never even heard of the guy until that day, and then in late 2007, when he announced he was running, I thought, I like this guy. I did some more research about him, thought he was very eloquent, liked his policy positions, and then I asked a friend of mine that knew somebody in the campaign, hey, if I designed an image in support of him, would that be an unwelcome endorsement? Because I'd done a lot of things that were kind of controversial. My big art show right before then was called E Pluribus Venom. So,
and you were arrested like 18 times, right?
Yeah.
Is that correct? Is that an accurate?
I think I was only at 15 at that point, but still, I had a criminal record.
You had a little bit of a record.
And so my friend got word back that they said, yeah, go ahead, make what you want to make. So I did it with their blessing, but not in official conjunction at all. I just did it like in the same way that I would do something protesting things I didn't like. I decided I would do something in support of someone that I thought could be maybe a Trojan horse in the U.S. political system, that somebody that I thought really seemed like he could be a transformative figure that was more unique than what you usually get at the top of the ticket.
And how quickly did that spread like wildfire? Did it spread fairly quickly?
It did, which was amazing. I did the poster. I did a short interview with a blog. I put the poster up for sale. I sold $350 and made $350 to put up on the street. And I said on my website, I'm using the money from the first $350 to print 10,000 more posters to give away, and immediately, those sold out. I made a free download. The download went out within 2 weeks. This was still when Google had pages instead of just a continuous feed. Within 2 weeks, there were 200 pages on Google worth of articles just on that. And
2008.
Yeah, in 2008. Yeah. So. And then,
he wrote you a letter, did he not?
He wrote me a letter about a month after I created it, because it had already gone viral in such a major way. And I was working with my friend Yossi Sergeant, who was a PR guy, who was a political activist also, who he was highly motivated, and he started helping to facilitate the printing of posters and stickers. And we quickly had printed 500,000 stickers and 300,000 posters, which were all given away.
So you really helped. I guess I would say that you had a big part in sort of him in the election. I mean, it's got to feel pretty incredible to know that you made such a big difference with your art. Well, I don't know if you see it as that, but I do, because I feel like that was a part of the imaging of that entire campaign.
It's if it helped at all, I'm very happy. And I was what I was moved by was that something that was a grassroots tool of activism caught fire and demonstrated to people that they don't have to just be spectators in democracy. Most people think not only all I can do is vote, is maybe even why even vote, because all the special interests have these backroom deals with the politicians anyway. So my vote doesn't even really matter much. But seeing how that worked and how a lot of people said, I think this is moving the needle on Obama's campaign, made me proud to be able to say, my belief that every action matters is manifested here.
Definitely.
So
pretty incredible.
Get off your ass.
Definitely. And since that, so 2008, fast forward now, we're at 2019 here. You've done so much. So you have an ad agency, you have your clothing line, you obviously do a ton of art, and you have your books, you have art shows. There's I don't know what you're not doing, because I feel like there's so many things that you're doing at this point. So take us to now, and obviously in terms of like the marketing of art, and I always like to talk about this, art is marketed in such a different way now, right? You look at Banksy, he was selling his own art in Central Park, obviously the famous shredded picture.
Yeah.
How do you think that the marketing of art has changed from when you first started with the stickering to now with the internet and whatnot, and just the way that you sort of get it out there in the world?
Well, the internet's made a huge difference, because now every artist who has the will to have an unmediated relationship with their audience, they can do that. And it's very important to me. My work was always about democratization and empowerment. And so, not that I have a problem with galleries or museums. I think they serve, some worthwhile functions. But for me to both sell inexpensive things like stickers and T-shirts and prints, as well as paintings is important. And so, the old gallery system's based on restrict the supply to increase the demand, and then charge more for these expensive
sort
trophies.
of elitist.
Yeah, and I'm I want to be able to spend time on paintings that I'm proud of, that I can sell for what I think they deserve to be paid for, and but at the same time, that's only one small facet of who I am as an artist. My main thing is to try to get people to see how they can participate creatively in the world. And for me, it's visual art, but it's more, this is an example, it's a case study, a template for whatever your way of interfacing with the world could be.
Definitely. So it's changed dramatically, obviously, and you have a lot of stuff that you've done to change the world. In terms of your activist stuff that you're doing now too, I mean, is there a cause that you're behind that you really feel strongly about now? Because obviously there's been a lot of things that you've gotten behind over the years. So
yeah, there's a lot of them, unfortunately.
And anyone in particular
the world is world's pretty
we're in a
messed
weird
up.
place. We're in a weird place.
Well, climate change is something that I'm really worried about, because that's going to threaten everyone's existence, and it doesn't matter which team you're on politically if there's no stadium left.
Yeah, if there's nothing left, there's nothing left to say.
But the I think right now the fear and division that's being stoked, racism, sexism, xenophobia, is really problematic, because we've done so much over the years to try to combat systemic inequality, and then to try to turn that into a brand politically is very disheartening. So everything I can do to support things like the ACLU Immigrant Rights Initiative, Black Lives Matter, a lot of different things that are about. I just did a thing with the Lower East Side Girls Club in New York.
Awesome. And you have your own gallery too, so I imagine that some of that's in Silver Lake, right?
Yeah, it's in Echo Park. It's
in Echo Park.
right by Dodger Stadium, Sunset. It's called Subliminal Projects, subliminalprojects.com. We do shows with a lot of emerging artists, some more established artists, and then we do a lot of workshops and other sort of activist things. We've got a show coming up about collaboration with Parks Project, which is about preserving our national park system.
Amazing. So you have the ad agency too. Is the ad agency on top?
Yeah, the ad agency is. I wouldn't say it's on top, but it's upstairs.
It's upstairs, right? And you have about 20 people working there, which is pretty cool, right?
Yeah, and I do very little on the day-to-day creating work for the agency, but I'm supervising the work. I'm looking at all the work, and I'm working on my own art. But I have a close relationship with all the designers, and I love working with a lot of the people that we work with because they're a business, but usually they're coming to us because they like where we're coming from philosophically as an agency. So there's sort of a synergy in art, commerce, philosophy, which is it's kind of the ideal situation in life.
Definitely. What do you think of artists because I've been to certain artist studios that shall remain nameless that are pretty well known that have teams doing their stuff, but they're not almost involved at all, right? And it's almost like they're producers at that point. But I'm sure there's a combination of stuff where you can, make the first print and whatnot, and then your team can sort of execute that. But do you have thoughts on how that process works now? From the beginning, you were always super involved and hands-on, and now when you become more of a brand, you need to sort of factor out some of this stuff, right?
Well, my clothing line is any clothing line that's decent scale. There's no way that one person can do it all. So I'm the creative director for the brand.
Obey the Clothing.
Yeah. I do about
.com.
60 to 80 t-shirt graphics a year are done by me, but I also have designers that work in my studio who help supplement the design there. When it comes to the design and the illustration for my own art, I'm doing all of that myself, but I have art assistants that help to execute
printing and
aspects
whatnot.
of it. Yeah. And I'm doing the best I can to find the balance between quality and quantity, because we live in a time where people are very impatient. If you did a huge show 6 months ago, but then you with 200 pieces, 6 weeks later, people are like, yeah, but that was like 6 weeks ago. What's next, man?
It's all about the next thing.
So I'm constantly trying to balance the quality of the output with needing to deal with the rapid metabolism of our culture.
Yeah. What are some of your favorite portraits that you've done? Because you've done a lot of iconic portraiture. So what are some of your favorites?
Well, I'm proud of the series I did for the Women's March. The We the People series, because they weren't famous people. They represented archetypes and with a degree of humanity that even if they weren't the typical religion or ethnicity, that they still felt equally American and equally human. So I'm proud of those. I've been sort of building off of that series, but I'm happy with the Punk Rock Icon series.
I love that series.
Early 2000s with Joey Ramone, Johnny Rotten, Joe Strummer, Glenn Danzig, and Ian MacKaye from Minor Threat. I like a lot of the hip-hop portraits that I've done of LL Cool J, Slick Rick, especially Chuck D from Public Enemy. I've done several portraits of him.
Did they all sit for you, or were those portraits you just took from images that you had?
They were all things where I either got the reference photos from the subject or from a photographer that was down to collaborate.
Cool.
And I have frequently taken my own photos of subjects when I can, but sometimes people are not still in their prime.
Yeah.
And I want to make an illustration of them at what I think is sort of their iconic Peak Essence.
Yeah, I just actually had my buddy Mick Rock on the show, who I believe you know pretty well.
Yeah, Mick and I have collaborated.
Yeah, he was speaking. Your name came up, and he was talking about some projects you guys have done or doing, whatever.
Yeah,
so,
Mick is great. I mean, he's got the absolute best Bowie images.
Exactly, and Queen, and
Iggy, and great Iggy stuff.
Definitely.
Lou Reed.
So 2019. Again, there's probably nothing that you're not doing because you're doing so much. But what's on the slate for 2019 for you?
Well, this is the 30th year since I started doing street art, since I created the Andre sticker. So, I have a series of shows called Facing the Giant, 3 Decades of Descent. And
where can we see that?
There's a show in New York in Brooklyn.
Beyond the Streets?
Beyond the Streets. Yeah. And I have a big section in that show, but it's a beautiful show with 150 artists and 100,000 square feet. That's up until August 25th. In LA, I'll be doing my big show November 9th at a gallery called Over the Influence.
Right. Awesome. And then obviously more books.
Yeah.
You got the Agency and more shows.
I'm about to hit 100 painted murals.
Amazing.
So I think I'm going to do a book of the 100 murals, but I'm not sure when that'll come out because I have a lot on my plate. But I try to make sure that there's good documentation of all my murals, so I have the raw material to put a good book together. Yeah,
I was looking at your website. It's interesting because you have your murals sort of pinpointed on like a Google map. It's almost like a treasure hunt, right? Because I was like, where do I find some of these murals? And you kind of have to search for them. But there's also one in the Warner Brothers building, I think Jem pointed out, right, that you just did, which is great. They have a new headquarters downtown. So that's awesome, man. I really enjoyed talking to you. It's awesome. Any tracks that we should play? Shepard Fairey definitely endorse, whether it's I'd love to play a Shepard track before we go.
Let's play Complete Control by The Clash.
Amazing. So you are listening to Lip Service Shepard Fairey. Check out all of Shepard's projects, your website.
obeygiant.com, Instagram @obeygiant.
This was a real pleasure. I knew I'd have a fun time talking to you, brother. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks,
and Shepard Fairey everything. Check it out, guys. Thanks for tuning in.